Well, I hope you did. I hope you watched his little blurb there. Did you see what I saw? Because what I think he did, whether he realizes it or not, is that he opened up his soul and exposed for the entire world to see what true north is for him. It will always, as an atheist, it will always point to Darwin's theory. It's inescapable. When he said that it was Charles Darwin which allowed me to become an intellectually fulfilled atheist. You could be an atheist before Darwin. Hume was. Making fun of him a little bit. It's okay, he can handle it. But intellectual fulfillment, how much is that worth to you, Mr. Dawkins? I mean, what if I were to write you a check for $1 million? Would you be willing to look away or look at another possibility? No, he can't. And of course, my check would bounce, but the thing is that intellectual fulfillment is what Charles Darwin provides not only Richard Dawkins, but every atheist on the planet. You see, Darwin's theory cut that final tether that bound humanity to God for existence. Darwin provided an alternative explanation that they had never had before. You see, where the atheist had a home run anytime he wanted to smack one out of the park by mentioning evil done in the name of God, the theist had an automatic home run. Anytime we were in those debates, we could always say, yeah, well, we may have done a lot of evil crap, but how'd we get here? And the atheist would, you know, dang it. They always get me with that one. I don't know how we got here, but that doesn't mean I have to believe in God. And you know what? You know, you're right. You don't have to believe in God. But what Darwin did is he took away that instant home run that we had. He cut that last tether that we needed as an explanation for our existence. And he provided an alternative theory that provided a plausibility to the atheists that they had never had before. Darwin put atheism into orbit. He was their rocket fuel. Darwinism is to the atheism as fertilizer is to your garden, okay? And so, for the first time, atheists had a credibility that they had never had before. And you introduced this to this shifting mix of society, and you had this atheism coalescing to form a communist party. Now let me be clear here. Is every atheist a communist? No, of course not. But I would suggest to you that every true hardcore communist is an atheist. And yes, I know that there's a lot of liberal theologians, like in the Catholic Church, that, you know, call themselves communists because they prefer Marx's economic theories to capitalist. But I wouldn't call them thoroughbred communists. Because part of the communist part of their manifesto is atheism. It's like the pure humanist. And they were going to create a grand experiment in Russia. You know, the grand experiment. They were going to sweep aside every last vestige of the old world systems. And they were going to show and demonstrate the superiority of their philosophy over any other. The power of the state. And if your country was being overrun by communism and you happened to be a believer, and it didn't matter what religion, it could be Buddhism or Hinduism or Islam or Christianity or Judaism, didn't matter. If you were a believer in God, you had a big red crosshairs on your forehead. You were next on their list. You were going to go be re-educated at their labor camps. And everywhere communism went, this horrible plague of murder and bloodshed and injustice went right with it. I mean, think about the purges of Stalin. It's estimated that 40 million people were murdered. Or Mao in China, it's like twice that. It's estimated that twice that number were murdered in the communist purges that swept through China. Or North Korea. There's a little paradise on earth there, huh? It's like the worst place on the planet to live. The numbers are, the head count, the body count continues to rise. Or, you know, post-Vietnam, the Khmer Rouge coming and sweeping through Vietnam. It's estimated like 3 million people were murdered in those purges. The African states, South America, Cuba, everywhere communism has gone, a plague of injustice and murder has followed. So the body count, I mean, just consider the body count. We're talking upwards of 140, 150 million people have lost their lives as a result of communism in the last 100 years. And you can't argue with Darwinism's connection to atheism, nor atheism's connection to communism. These are conjoined twins. They're joined at the head, the heart, and the hip. You can't, there's no surgery to be done to separate these. They're default settings for one another. So I see connections. I see connections between Darwin's theory and more massive murder, megadeath, murder on a mega scale than has ever happened throughout human history in the name of God. So yeah, you think this is still a tempest in a teapot? Still think this question of origins doesn't matter? Live and let live? No, this has got implications. This has got deep bedrock implications, not only for our lives as individuals, but for societies. But wait, there's more. And this is what's really bizarre. This is so curious to me. This has got to be one of the most twisted, ironic situations in this whole discussion. And it's this. It is in the same way that Darwin empowered this cold, mechanistic, random, spiritually void, godless universe of the atheist. This is the twist. Darwin's theory also empowered this evil, satanic, occultic, spiritual mysticism that was also emerging at the same time early in the 20th century, late 19th, early 20th century. I'm talking about Madame Blavatsky and her Theosophist Society. If you're not familiar, look it up. Alice Bailey and her Lucifer Trust. Aleister Crowley, the self-proclaimed wickedest man on the planet. These people and others like them, all within the same genre, were coming back from these trance states and purporting to have made contact with ascended masters. And these beings were telling them that they had evolved to the point that we would call them gods. And that they were here at this time making contact with humanity to help us along in our next evolutionary step. That we were at a critical mass, that we were at a juncture in human evolution, and that we were on a trajectory towards our own godhood, and that they were here to help, that they were here to shepherd us as we moved along. Key word. Right? I mean, the evolution is tied into this. Darwin's theory is bedrock to these assumptions that these people are making. So let's, that to me is so twisted. And this, like I said, I wanted to bring some points of emphasis that you're probably not hearing anybody else talk about in the intelligent design versus evolution debate. I see some dark connections to Darwin's theory in human suffering and misery. And as murderous as the communist plague has been, my real concern is with this other dark mysticism, this dark occultic spirituality that also emerged from Darwinism. It's like this stream of Darwinism, and out from this fountain, two dark rivers are emerging. One, the atheist stream, and one, this dark mystical spirituality. So let's take a look at some of the fruit of this other side. One of the things you have to know is that from this dark spirituality emerged an idea called eugenics. Look it up. It's online. Let me say this in a nutshell. Eugenics is what Darwinism looks like when humanity goes from being a passive recipient of natural selection to an active participant with what they perceive to be truth. Eugenics is what Darwinism looks like when we take the ball and run with it. And eugenics is, in a nutshell, the idea that we have a responsibility, or even more than that, we have a moral obligation to purge the human genome of pollution. Now, these eugenics societies were popping up all over early 20th century America like mushrooms on a turd. And these eugenics societies were affluent, educated, and white. Any idea what might have been considered genetic pollution from the perspective of these groups? Need some help there? I'll just tell you, it's black people, it's African Americans were considered genetic pollution, that they should not be allowed to pollute humanity with their offspring. It's estimated that early in the 20th century American history, over 65,000 forced sterilizations occurred on black people. A dark chapter in American history that most people don't know about, but it's there. Now, 65,000 forced sterilizations may not sound like much in comparison to the 140, 50 million murdered in the wake of communism, but remember the timeline. Eugenics preceded communism by decades. So we were getting the ball rolling pretty quickly here. Now, I would be remiss if I did not mention humanity's premier eugenicist. What was that guy's name? German fella, funny mustache. Wanted to wipe out an entire race of people because he thought they were subhuman. Yeah, that's it. Hitler. Hitler is the premier eugenicist of the human race. Eugenics is what Darwinism looks like when it enters human consciousness. Isn't there a moral obligation to eradicate genetic pollution from the gene pool? Don't we owe that to humanity? Isn't it much like a doctor removing a cancer? Yeah, the patient will endure pain, but if we don't do it, the patient's going to die. This is the thinking of the Nazis and Hitler, that they had to remove this subhuman pollution from the human gene pool. This is Darwinism. This is what Darwinism looks like when people act consistently with the belief system. People call Hitler a madman, and I'm sure he was. But most madmen don't act so consistently with a belief system. So what's our body count up to now? We got, what, 6 million Jews were slaughtered in the concentration camps. But that's not it. I mean, we had Nazi scientists taking out calipers and stuff and measuring the width between your eyes, or the length of your nose, or the thickness of your lips, or other body parts to find out if you were subhuman or not. It's estimated that over 10 million people were murdered in the concentration camps, and there were hundreds of them. Yeah, we've heard of Auschwitz and Treblinka and the big names, but everywhere Hitler went, he started concentration camps all over the place. Millions of people murdered. And then there's World War II. We had to stomp the monster out. So let's add another 50 million to our body count. Still think ideas don't matter? Still think this is just a tempest in the teapot? That the question of origins is just, yeah, live and let live. Well, wait. There's more.